Good morning and welcome to the National Government Ethics Virtual Summit. I'm Patrick Shepard.
And I'm Ryan Segrist, and we're very pleased to be giving you a presentation today on widely attended gatherings.
Yes, and in the spirit of our virtual-only sessions, this is mirroring the new ethics official track. So this is an introduction to the regulation itself, right, Ryan?
That's right.
We're not going to cover in great detail exactly how you apply that. If I were a new ethics official and I wanted some more guidance on how to apply the widely attended gathering exception, what would you recommend I do?
I think the first thing that I would recommend that people do is to go to OGE's advisories page and just do a search for widely attended gatherings. We have an opinion from 2006,
yes,
which is very comprehensive, covering G2, and we also have a recent opinion that we issued covering G1.
Yeah, so those are both excellent opinions. We also delivered a class in August concerning widely attended gatherings. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So if you're wanting to have a more practical application-based learning experience with widely attended gatherings, go ahead and go to our Google Plus or YouTube page where you will find a 3-hour-long course where we go into great detail with the regulation and also do some practical application.
Yeah, and that course is organized into 2 parts, I believe. So we have a 1-hour presentation that provides some basic training. And then you have a break, a time period that you can try your hand at some practical application. And then finally we have a 2-hour debrief that will allow you to get some feedback on how you did.
Right, and to find the materials for that, you'll need to go to the Institute for Ethics in Government, max.gov community, and you will find the materials there.
Yeah, there's a wealth of resources really at the IEG Max community, so if you've not found that, I'd encourage you to look that up. You can find the link in Education Advisory 13-1.
So before we get started, let's go ahead and take a minute just to run through all of the different virtual offerings that we're having for the rest of the virtual summit.
Yeah, we're roughly at the midpoint of the National Government Ethics Virtual Summit. So what do we have coming up in the next few days?
Well, so just to remind everyone that this afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we're going to be covering the rest of the gift exceptions, as well as running through the exclusions if we have enough time.
Yeah, so that should be very interesting, and I do hope you join us this afternoon for that final session in our introduction to the gifts regulation.
And then on Friday is the next time that we'll be doing something virtually. We'll be live at the National Institutes of Health, live streaming an entire day's worth of content. We're going to be covering 9 to 5:30 actually. That we're going to have all of the main plenary sessions for the day will be live streamed for you, and we'll be here providing commentary and interviews with speakers and
guests
all of that in between.
Throughout the day. Yes, we have some exciting sessions there. Anna Galindo-Maroon will be joining us from the Office of Special Counsel to talk about some Hatch Act issues.
And an old friend of OGE's, Lenny Lowentritt from GSA, will be giving a presentation on travel regulations.
Yes, and we've put him at the end of the day, so he might finally get through that presentation. So if you've seen him before and you've always wondered what happens at the end of the presentation, it seems he always runs out of time. We hope to bring you the entirety of that presentation, so we look forward to that as well.
Yeah. Also, next Monday, we have 2 more virtual-only sessions. Then we'll be closing out the virtual-only sessions. The last 2 sessions are going to be a lot more advanced than the ones that we've been doing so far. OGE's own Monica Asher is going to be covering the regulations that cover non-career employees.
That's right, and that should be a really valuable resource because there are a number of regulations that are specific to those non-career folks. And if you're at an agency where you don't have a lot of non-career officials, you can go a long time between having to look at those. So having a resource you can go back to will be very helpful.
Right. Not having to reteach yourself every time is a valuable asset.
Yes.
The other virtual-only session that we're going to be covering is how to brief senior leaders at your agency about ethics.
Yep, and that should be very exciting. Cheryl Kim-Piasecki, Ryan, and I will be delivering that session. And we'll be talking about some things we've picked up over the years about briefing leaders and how you can help them help you in your agency and your ethics program. So, please do look for that, and we look forward to concluding the new ethics official version or portion of the virtual events later this afternoon.
Right, and the final thing, we will be closing out the National Government Ethics Virtual Summit on Tuesday next week at live at the Federal Housing Finance Agency.
That's right.
We will be live streaming the entire day, and we hope very much to see you there and close out the summit with us.
And we have some exciting things planned for next Tuesday. We'll have a number of stakeholders from outside of the government, so people we don't hear from very often. but who have a great interest in the work that we do as ethics officials. And they'll be sharing some of those views, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that and having the opportunity to interview some of those people for you, our virtual viewers.
Me too. So with that, shall we get into the slides?
Let's do that, Ryan.
Okay.
So this is the third part of our Understanding Gift Exceptions presentation, and if you joined us yesterday for the first two parts, you know that we're talking about the exceptions primarily, but that it might be useful to discuss a little bit the advice and counsel process in general and the GIFs microprocess in particular. And we've been through this twice, so we're going to do this very briefly. We want to leave enough time to talk about the WAG exception, but we do want to provide you some context of our broader discussion today. So let's take a look at the advice and counsel. What have we decided is, Ryan? The advice and counsel spheroid?
Spheroid, I also like to call it the advice and counsel apple, because you have to take lots of bites out of it.
Or the wheel, the advice and counsel wheel is also apt. And we say all this not just to be funny, but also because there's a reason that we don't number this process, and that's because the advice and counseling process is not a linear process, is it?
It's not. There is no teleology to this at all. You often have to, as you do your analysis after you've spotted the issues and you've gathered facts for it, and you've applied the rules to the facts, oftentimes your employee that you're providing advice and counsel to will come back and say, oh wait, I forgot to tell you this. And then you have to go back and ask some more questions, get some more facts, apply the rules a little differently based on that new information. So it's something that you often have to spin around several times.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, with experience comes the ability to spot issues and to know which facts you really need. But when you're learning, it's good to keep this process in mind and keep in mind the fact that it is not a linear process, even for the most experienced among us, and that sometimes you are going to need to go back in the process.
Right.
What we're hoping to do today is to help you know a little bit more about the rules. But as we go through that, we will be pointing out some issues that represent traps for the unwary.
And we'll also be going through some frequently asked questions that come up, and particularly with G1 and G2, there are many. So we're going to try and get through a few of those at least to make sure that, that when you're looking at these and you think that something applies differently, we'll see what we can do to make sure that you know how it actually applies.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of misconceptions surrounding the widely attended gathering exception. I also think there's some misunderstanding about the function that the exception is supposed to play in the ethics laws and regulations. And another place that I would encourage you to look if you're looking to learn more about the widely attended gathering exception is the preamble to the final rule. When OG issued the standards of conduct, we had quite a significant discussion about the widely attended gathering exception in the preamble. And I think reading that is really illuminating. And before I read that, I didn't really understand WAG. After reading that, it became much clearer to me.
Right. The reasons why it is the way it is are made much more clear than just reading the rule itself.
And we'll be very pleased to point out some of those nuances as we go through today's presentation.
Right. So the next thing that we want to talk about, just briefly, is our GIFs analysis microprocess. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, if this is your first virtual session that you've attended on GIFs, just very briefly, we're going to walk through this process, and this process is sort of microprocess, nested within that advice and counsel process.
Yeah, it's a kind of advice and counsel. It helps us to navigate the gift rule as a whole when we're providing advice and counsel. And it's a microprocess both because it's a subset of the broader advice and counsel process, but also because it's a fairly straightforward process. So what are the parts here, Ryan?
Well, so the first part is, as we go through the process, the first thing that we need to know is whether or not the thing that is being offered is in fact a gift.
So we don't mean just a gift in the vernacular sense, but a gift in the technical sense for this exception, right?
Right. The definition of a gift, which you can find at 5 CFR 2635 subpart B.
Yes.
The definition of a gift is delimited to the regulation. So we're only talking about gifts for purposes of the regulation.
Subpart B of the standards. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I think this afternoon we should have some time to take a look at that definition. So if you're not clear about the definition of a gift, or you're unsure about some of the exclusions from the definition of a gift, please join us this afternoon where we'll take some time to talk about those. And they're common sense things. They're things that are customarily offered that don't present risks of undue influence or public office for private gain, that people should just be able to accept.
Right.
So those are things that are excluded from the definition. They're in fact not gifts. But what about all those other things? In this case, we're going to be talking about invitations. And generally speaking, invitations are not going to be excluded from the definition of a gift. Invitations, entertainment, food, things like that are going to qualify as gifts in the main. So where do we go next?
So the next thing that we need to find out, if we have determined that it is in fact a gift, then the next thing we're going to have to determine is whether or not it is a prohibited gift.
And we have two prohibitions in the gift rule. Is that right, Ryan?
That's right. There's two horns to it. The first one is you're prohibited from accepting a gift from a prohibited source.
Okay, so prohibited source, I think I remember this from yesterday. This is someone who basically does business or seeks to do business with their agency, someone we regulate, someone maybe seeking official agency action, someone who can be affected by the performance or non-performance of an employee's official duties.
Right, and just as part of the parlance that we use when we're talking about gifts and ethics, in particular, one of those outside entities that's offering the gift that can be directly affected by the performance or non-performance of an employee's duties, we refer to that as a bad prohibited source.
Yeah, so we may be seeing that a little bit later in the presentation.
Right, and now the other horn of the prohibition is you also cannot accept gifts that are given because of your official position.
So in the first case, the motivation for the gift is not important. It's just the source of the gift, and the source is dispositive. If it's from a prohibited source, it's prohibited under the general prohibition.
Right.
And in the other case, the source of the gift is not important. The only thing that's important is the motivation. Is the gift being given because of your official position?
That's right.
And we only have to satisfy one of those.
Right. It's an or. It is a disjunct.
Okay, very good. Well, that leaves a lot of prohibited gifts, and I can see lots of cases where that would create some kind of absurd results.
Oh, yes, definitely. And because of that, OGE has built in a bunch of exceptions to accepting prohibited gifts.
So that's the third part of our process. If we find that something qualifies as a gift for purpose of subpart B, and it meets one or both of those prohibitions, then we have to look to see if an exception could be used to accept a gift, if we think it's appropriate to accept that gift.
Right, and one thing I would like to highlight that you just said is could be used.
Right, there's no requirement that we use an exception if it might apply. In fact, these are all discretionary, and the regulation itself indicates that it is always appropriate and frequently prudent to decline a gift, notwithstanding the applicability of an exception.
That's right. These, for those of you who are familiar with the 208 exemptions at 2640, these do not apply automatically.
Yeah, so unlike the exemptions for certain kinds of financial holdings, these do not apply automatically, and they should be considered carefully. And in fact, today, as we discuss the widely attended gathering exception, this is one where the criteria of judgment, the criteria of prudence, is actually built into the exception itself. So it requires a judgment of prudence on behalf of the agency before it may be exercised. So not only does this not apply automatically, it also requires affirmative activity by an agency ethics official or other designee when the exception is going to be utilized. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
Right. So shall we move into the regulation?
Yes, let's go ahead and get into the regulation. That sounds great.
Before we do that,
we always want to point out the reference material.
Right, and you can find this on the Watch Now page on OGE's website. This handout is useful. It's got the GIFS microprocess on it, and it's also got some advice and counsel tips, among other things. There are some other good resources on there that are available for you to use as part of your practice. And
when I was starting out as a desk officer here at OG almost 10 years ago, I found tools like this to be an excellent supplement to the regulation. I'd caution you against using these in place of the regulation. We always want to go to the text of the rule. But as a supplement to the regulation, as a guide to navigating the regulation, a fantastic tool, and I'd encourage you to keep it on your desk.
Yes. Okay, so the first part of the regulation that we're going to look at is at 2635.204G1.
This isn't even about widely attended gatherings, is it, Ryan?
It's not.
It's sort of the prelude to the widely attended gathering. It's the place you should look before you commit yourself to a WAG analysis, because it could save you some time.
Well, the relationship of WAGs to other things. Maybe we should note that briefly here. If you're in a situation where you're where 1353 will apply, then you have to use 1353. You cannot use WAG in place of 1353.
And if you join us on Friday, Lenny Lowentrip from GSA is very likely to emphasize that very point. And there are a number of other authorities that might apply that you might consider before getting to the widely attended gathering exception. One that I always encourage agency ethics officials to look at is whether or not they have agency gift acceptance. Because what we're doing with the widely attended gathering is offering employees the ability to attend events where it's in the agency interest for them to do so.
Right, and a question that we often get is, well, why do they have to be in? Why does it have to be in their personal capacity? Why do they have to be on their own time to do it?
It's a strange hybrid of personal participation, personal gift acceptance, and agency interest. But there is a way to do this if you have agency gift acceptance without going to the WAG exception.
Right, because the WAG exception was built specifically the way it was for those agencies that don't have agency gift acceptance authority.
OGE recognized that employees sometimes needed to attend events to further the goals of the agency and their own professional development, and that requires the acceptance of gifts. And agencies that have agency gift acceptance authority have routinely used it to accept gifts of free attendance to events that are in the agency's interest. So an employee would accept the attendance on behalf of the government, attend personally, or attend in their official capacity, represent the agency's interest, and further the interests. But then what do we do about agencies that don't have gift acceptance authority?
The ones that don't have gift acceptance authority will have to look to WAG if 1353 does not apply.
So if we don't have another authority that might apply, if we've exhausted other opportunities to send someone in their official capacity, but we still think their attendance would be in the agency's interest,
right,
then and only then do we want to look to the widely attended gathering exception.
Yeah, and the amount of work that goes into a typical WAG analysis is it is enough to make sure that you've exhausted all of the other potential possibilities before you get to WAG.
Yeah, exactly. And those possibilities, in some ways, are tidier. If you can send someone using your agency gift acceptance, it's very clear as to whether or not they're attending in their personal or official capacities.
Right.
We know they're attending officially. There's great clarity about when they can use government resources, whether they can use government travel funds, those kinds of things. So it kind of simplifies matters to send someone officially. But in the case that you can't do that, you don't have that option available at your agency, then the widely attended gathering exception can be very helpful.
Yes. So let's go ahead and
let's talk about another prelude to the WAG, which is G1.
Right, and I had to sneak this one in here. So let's go ahead and talk about speaking in similar engagements. What are we trying to do here, Patrick?
Well, I think what OGE is doing here, and this is in some ways not even an exception to the gift rule. Basically, this is an exclusion that we put over next to the WAG rule because they are so often analyzed together. So what G1 says is that if an employee is assigned to speak in his or her official capacity at an event, attendance at the event on the day that they speak is not a gift. It's not a gift to the employee. It's not a gift to the agency. It's something that's customary and necessary for someone to fulfill a speaking engagement. So what we're saying here is that if you don't have agency gift acceptance, that's okay. If your employee is speaking on that day, their attendance at the event is customary and does not constitute a gift to the employee or to the agency.
Right. Now, what about the other days, though? What if
it's a multi-day event? Well, if they're only speaking on one day, that's the only day that you can use G1.
Ah, okay.
So you might have to do a separate gifts analysis or exercise your agency gift acceptance to allow participation on those other days.
Okay, so actually, I have another question for you.
Okay.
Let's say that let's say there's a chance that I might present on behalf of the agency. Okay. Let's say that I'm not a speaker per se,
right?
But I could still go to the event and maybe talk about what the agency does informally.
I think that's a place where we want to be very, very careful about how we counsel employees. And I think one of the opinions you referenced before dealt with this explicitly.
It did.
And what did we say in that opinion?
It said you can't do that.
That merely potentially having the opportunity to speak isn't sufficient to exercise G1.
Right.
Right. You have to be assigned to speak. There has to be a speaking role for you. You can't be sent sort of provisionally looking for a speaking role or with the intention of maybe sharing some ideas.
Right.
That what we're really looking at here is official speaking assignments. So one of the things we could do in that case is we could either use our agency gift acceptance authority, we could pay for the employee to attend, or we could look at the widely attended gathering, the exception.
Right.
Okay, so G1 is fairly straightforward. It makes sense. It's a good place to look before you get to G2 and WAG, because it can save you a lot of difficulty.
Yes, it can. So
let's do that. Let's look at G2.
Okay, so this is a pretty gnarly, long portion of regulation that has definitions built into it, and also some processes built into it.
Yeah, this is almost like a rule unto itself. It has its own little ecosystem of definitions and moving pieces. And I'd encourage you to think about it that way. It's sort of a hybrid monster of an exception that we have to be very careful when we're reading, because there's some critical parts hiding in that big block of text, and keeping those straight is one of the big challenges of WAG.
So let me go ahead and just read the basic part of this to you. So when there has been a determination that his attendance is in the interest of the agency because it will further agency programs and operations, an employee may accept an unsolicited gift of free attendance at all or appropriate parts of a widely attended gathering of mutual interest to a number of parties from the sponsor of the event. Stop.
Okay, so that sounds like the first piece of the WAG.
Right.
Okay.
So let's actually talk about just that first piece of the WAG. So what we're going to do, we have some things that probably need to be defined in here, and we do have some definitions. What is free attendance, for example?
Yeah, I think that's an important part. It's important to note that paragraph G4 is a definition of free attendance.
Right.
It is not a standalone exception to the rule.
It is not, and you cannot G4 anything.
Yes, yeah. The G4 is not a gift an exception to the gift rule. G4 is a definition of free attendance for purposes of
G2
provisions at G1 and G2.
Right.
All right, Ryan. So tell me, what does free attendance include?
So it can include a waiver of the conference fee, all of it or part of it.
Very good.
You can talk about the provision of food, refreshments, entertainment, instruction, and materials that everybody gets when they get there.
Very good.
But it does. Here's the thing that's important, though: it does not include travel expenses,
Okay.
lodgings, entertainment that is collateral to the event,
Okay.
or meals taken other than in group settings.
Okay, so let's start with the travel and lodgings. I think I understand the relationship here between the definition at G4 and the WAG exception, and 31 U.S.C. 1353, which is the government-wide statutory authority for non-sponsored travel.
Right.
And that has a reporting requirement. If you're exercising 1353 to accept travel, you must report that to OGE. You have to tell us twice a year where you exercise that, and then those reports are made publicly available.
Yeah.
And because of that, use of 1353 is mandatory when the agency intends to accept gifts of travel paid by non-federal sources. So I think that's why we excluded that from the definition of free attendance here. But the net result is that we cannot use G2 to accept travel.
Right.
Okay, so that makes sense for the first part. What about, you said something about collateral meals, collateral entertainment. Could you talk a little about that?
Yeah. So what we were trying to get at with this is preventing situations where you have someone who goes out to a conference, for example, and maybe it's like a one-day thing, and then there's a baseball game afterwards that is not actually part of the event.
Yes.
But they do advertise for it, which is like obviously the baseball game is the big thing. And we're trying to prevent employees from looking like they're using their public office for private gain in situations like that.
Okay, and when we talk about meals and smaller groups, I think we're also, we're trying to limit any undue influence that could come from attendance. Sometimes you'll have these large plenary events, a conference or other widely attended gathering, and at the conference there will be, stakeholders or other interested parties who want to gain access to federal employees. And if they were to host, say, private dinners or smaller events, collateral to that event, meals taken in other than a group setting, the concern is that, that may be using the gift of the meal to get, extra influence upon government processes. You don't want people getting buttonholed at these things.
Right.
So I think that those are some of the reasons we exclude those from the definition of free attendance. And I see you've just changed the slide to the sponsor problem. And I think when we get to G2, where you left off, You said we could accept those things, gifts of free attendance, from the sponsor of the event.
Right.
And then we're going to talk about the next part, which is going to talk about gifts from non-sponsors. And this is the part that makes my head hurt.
Yes, this is the part that most people get confused. They will conflate. You may remember when I was reading that. When provided by the sponsor of the event.
Full stop.
Full stop. There's an or that happens after that. There's actually two parts to G2. One of them deals with the sponsor of the event,
right,
and the other one deals with non-sponsors.
Yes, so gifts of free attendance from non-sponsors. There's some additional limitations on gifts from non-sponsors. Is that right? Right.
And this is where people will start to get things confused. So let's take a look at the definition of a sponsor, which we can find at G5,
okay,
which is a cost provided by the sponsor of the event.
Okay.
This is why we call it the sponsor problem. So what it says is the cost of the employee's attendance will not be considered to be provided by the sponsor, and the invitation is not considered to be from the sponsor of the event, where a person other than the sponsor designates the employee to be invited and bears the cost of the employee's attendance through a contribution or other payment intended to facilitate that employee's attendance. Payment of dues or similar assessment to a sponsoring organization does not constitute a payment intended to facilitate a particular employee's attendance.
Yeah,
that does not clear it up very well.
It doesn't. The definition at G5, the language we have at G5, does not do a very good job of telling us what is meant by sponsor of the event. And OG has opined upon this over the years a number of times. And the result is somewhat counterintuitive. This is a place where reliance upon your vernacular understanding of the word sponsor can lead you very far astray. It's very, very problematic if you use the vernacular understanding of the word sponsor. And the reason for that is because when we say sponsor, we actually mean host. We mean the person or organization that is putting on the event. We don't mean people who are providing monetary support only for the event. And in the vernacular, we normally understand someone who is a sponsor of an event or a team or any other sort of entity as someone who's providing finance. But in this case, a sponsor doesn't mean someone who's providing finance.
Right. So there's a difference between a financial contributor and a host,
right,
for example.
So that would have been a cleaner way of articulating that in the regulation.
Yes.
So I think for the rest of the day, as we're talking about WAG, where we see the word sponsor, we should mentally substitute the word host.
Right.
So this is the person that's providing, or the organization that's providing, for the logistics, for the planning, for the purchasing of supplies and services and all of that kind of stuff. The host of the event, the things that we do that usually fall under our vernacular understanding of host.
Right, and for the word non-sponsor,
I think contributor is
a good way to think about it.
Is a good way of thinking about it. So these are people who are maybe buying a table at a larger event, buying a number of tickets that they can hand out, contributing some sum of money, which allows them to designate certain persons to be added to the guest list.
Right.
Those people would be non-sponsors in the parlance of G2.
Right.
Or contributors in English as we understand it.
Yes.
So hopefully that clears up the sponsor problem a little bit.
I sure hope so. And this is again where we start to run into well, we'd actually just talked about G2 and sponsors instead of. So hosts and contributors are the way we want to talk about it. So let me.
So if a gift of free attendance is being offered by the host or sponsor for purposes of G2,
right,
we don't really have limitations. We have to make a determination of agency interest, which we'll talk about in a second.
Mm-hmm.
But there's that list of limitations. There's a dollar threshold that changes year over year. That's not applicable when we're looking at gifts from the host or sponsors of an event, right?
That's right. We're also not talking, there's not a specific number of persons required to attend, although we have opined in the past that a dinner party is probably too small.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting point to make about the WAG exception, is that in the case of gifts from sponsors, we do not put a lower limit on what constitutes widely attended.
Mm-hmm.
And we said explicitly in the preamble that's because the stakeholder groups for certain agencies vary wildly in size.
Right.
And in fact, you and I were teaching a class in WAG recently, and we had a student whose agency regulates a very small industry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not a very small industry, a rather large industry with a very small number of players.
Yeah.
And he is saying that at his agency, they could have a representative from basically every major company that they regulate and fit around a conference room table.
Right.
And they said they really appreciate the flexibility that we built into the WAG invitations from sponsors for that reason. So, that's a flexibility that we've left for you for that very reason. And if you're in that boat, please take advantage of where it's in your agency's interest. OMG isn't usually in the business coming around behind you saying, well, we know we didn't say that it had to be at least a dozen, but what we really meant was it was a dozen, so when you went to that event with 11, that's not enough. We really want you to make a factual determination.
Right. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense before the or.
Yeah, and the or, I think by confusing these two provisions, people make this harder than it needs to be.
Right. If you have your regulations open in front of you, I recommend circling that or and putting a star next to it so you know to stop first to confirm whether or not there is that the invitation is being offered by the sponsor or by the host of the event.
Right. And we mentioned a little bit earlier, Ryan, that this is kind of a rule unto itself. If I were redrafting this portion of the regulation, I think I'd make these separate paragraphs.
Oh, I definitely would too.
Okay. So what happens after the or? What is this distinct from?
So this is distinct from, and I've gotten in scare quotes here, non-sponsors, which
Or
we're referring to as contributors.
Non-hosts.
So after the or if more, hang on for a second.
We have a number of provisions here, right?
Right, or if more than 100 persons are expected to attend the event, and the gift of free attendance has a market value of $350 or less from a person other than the sponsor of the event.
Okay, so we have two additional criteria that we have to meet when we're accepting a gift from a non-sponsor. And one of those is that we have to have 100 people there. 100 persons have to be in attendance.
Right.
The other one is that the market value has to be less than $350.
Correct.
And that's a number that changes all the time. OG will issue a legal advisory updating you when that number does change.
Right.
But for the time being, we're talking about $350. So these are just a couple of extra criteria that we need to apply when we're considering gifts from people other than the host of the event or non-sponsors in the parlance of the exception.
Right. And why would we do that?
I think there's a concern that you have a greater ability to exert maybe undue influence. There's a greater risk of undue influence when you're getting a gift from a non-sponsor.
Well, not only that, the contributors also have the ability to specifically target you.
Right.
And
I think the scenario that we were thinking about when we authored this part of the provision is you have some of these larger events in D.C. where you have a big ballroom set with a number of tables. A lot of people are invited. They enjoy some speeches, some entertainment, a meal. They have an opportunity to talk to one another. But within these events, there are really sort of sub-events that are funded by the contributors or non-sponsors, where they might purchase a table, and at that table they may have a greater ability to exert influence or to control the experience of the federal employee. So we want to use just a little bit extra care when that's the case.
So just to reiterate, we've got two different exceptions within the exception. We've got the one for hosts,
yes,
and we've got
sponsors.
the one for sponsors, and we've got the one for non-sponsors or contributors.
Yes.
So let's take a minute and talk about agency determinations now. So we're just moving through the regulation.
And this is really where the rubber hits the road.
Right.
And I think this is also where we get the confusion about, is this an exception to the gift rule that applies to employees, or is this an official capacity kind of thing? And the answer, this is a case where an employee can accept a gift personally, where the employee's acceptance of that gift is in the interest of the agency. And here we get some criteria to help us determine what kinds of gifts are in the interest of the agency. So what are those?
So the criteria is we need to look at the situation and make an oral or written determination. So the first one is to take a look and see if the person who's extended the invitation has interests that may be substantially affected by the performance or non-performance of the employee's official duties.
Those words are familiar to me, Ryan. I think when we were talking about prohibited sources a little bit earlier, we described that as a quote-unquote bad prohibited source.
That's right.
So if this person is, in addition to being a prohibited source, someone who is potentially affected by the performance or non-performance of the employee's official duties, we have a greater duty of care here.
That's right.
Okay?
Okay. Okay, and when we're talking about a bad prohibited source,
Yes.
We need to have a written determination. It has to be written down.
And I think, as a general matter, it's a good practice to write down your WAG determinations. I know a lot of agencies have a form or other data gathering tool that allows them to make routine the processing of widely attended gathering invitations. So if you're not in the habit of making written determinations, it's really a good thing to do, because these are areas where agencies are sometimes criticized, and being able to produce your analysis readily can save you a lot of headache.
Right, and what you are going to be making the determination of is that the employee's participation in the event outweighs the concern that acceptance of the gift might unduly affect that employee's impartiality or make it look like they're misusing their position.
So we have a balancing test here, right? We are determining that the agency's interest in an employee's attendance outweighs really appearance concerns or the possibility of criticism to the agency or the employee for their attendance.
Yeah.
So that's why we have the specific provision about the quote-unquote bad prohibited source, because there's a higher likelihood of an impartiality problem when an organization or person would be affected by the performance or non-performance of an employee's duty.
Yeah.
But generally what we're doing here is we're providing agencies the flexibility to determine when it is in their interest for an employee to accept a gift of free attendance. And the way they do that is by balancing potential appearance concerns or impartiality concerns against the interest of the agency. What are some ways that an agency could be interested in having an employee attend?
It could be... So I'm not sure I understand that question.
Sure. So, for example, if I'm an ethics official and I'm sitting in my office and an employee has said, I think I've been invited to this, and I have a pretty good handle on what the potential appearance concerns are, where criticism might be leveled against the employee or the agency. And now I'm trying to measure the agency's interest. What kinds of things might an employee do at an event that would further agency operations or interest?
Okay, I understand. So let's say that at this event, you're the chair of your appropriations committee.
Okay. So maybe a member of Congress who's important to our agency or other external stakeholder. It might be something as simple as having the opportunity to share some agency information with that person.
Right.
It might involve just strengthening that relationship. It might be important to you that that person has frequent contacts or numerous contacts with external stakeholders.
Right, and I'm also thinking a community of practice, for example. It would be a good idea to send employees out to learn more information, to network with other people and find out what they're doing that is similar to what the employee does. Sort
of taking the temperature of maybe a regulated agency or regulated industry, trying to see what the industry perspective is on a set of matters. Stay abreast of current events in matters that are of interest to the agency. So there are all sorts of things, and they're going to vary across the government. They're going to be particular to your agency and its mission. But if your mission is advanced by an employee's attendance, and you think that that particular attendance or that particular piece of work outweighs any appearance concerns or a possibility of criticism, it's okay to authorize the employee to attend, provided you meet the other provisions of G2.
Right. The discretion to use G2 is built into this. Use it.
Yeah, and I think this is another place where it's important to understand the history of G2, which is that this is designed for agencies that aren't able to, for whatever reason, to use their gift acceptance authorities or other authorities to send an employee in their official capacity. That employee can still get the benefits of the receipt of that gift if the agency determines that their attendance would be in the agency's interest. So, again, it's not OGE's place to tell you where and how your agency's interests are advanced. That's an agency prerogative call. But what we do emphasize is the process.
Right, and we've got some factors in that process that you're required to think about as part of your determinations. And we've got these listed here. So we need to know about, the importance of the event to the agency. Is this something that would be very important to have agency personnel at? The nature and sensitivity of any pending matter affecting the interests of the person who's extended the invitation. Okay,
so yes, if you have pending matters, if the person extending the invitation is soon going to be affected by an agency action, that would weigh in the column of a potential appearance concern or an opportunity for criticism.
Right. We would also want to look at though there's a caveat there a little bit, we would also want to look at the significance of the employee's role in any such matter. If it's a very...
So this analysis isn't just an agency analysis, but it can differ from employee to employee?
Yeah.
So we might have a situation where the attendance of one employee or category of employee at our agency certainly furthers agency operations in a way that outweighs any appearance concerns or possibility of criticism. Whereas you might have another category of employee or even an individual employee whose attendance would not do that, would not meet the agency determination threshold.
Right.
I can see how that could be complicated to explain to employees who know each other and know they've been invited, but I think it's good to know that that's a possibility, and in fact there's many cases where it's prudent to make different determinations for different employees.
Absolutely. So the next consideration is what the purpose of the event is,
Yes.
which, I mean, you could have someone who is invited to go to a boxing match.
Yes.
I don't know how that is in your agency's interests, but...
And OG has said generally sporting events aren't organized in such a way as to facilitate the sharing of ideas or to meet this threshold.
Right.
But that would be a determination that each agency would have to make.
And the last two I feel like are pretty obvious. The identity of the other entities or organizations, other participants in the event.
Yes.
And also the market value of the gift.
Okay, so we want to look at the value of the gift because that's a contributing factor when we're considering the possibility of criticism or impartiality concerns. Very good. So it looks like agencies have a lot of flexibility, but it is important for them to go through the process properly and make note of those special limitations.
Right.
Okay.
So let's talk about guests real quick. You can find this at G6.
This causes me a lot of confusion for some reason. I think it's just a strange provision, and it's stuck in right at the end here.
Yeah, it confuses me a little bit too.
I tend to forget about it, honestly. All right, so what's going on with the guests?
So with the guests, when you're talking about an event where everyone else in attendance is generally going to be accompanied by their spouse or another guest, the agency designee can authorize an employee to accept the invitation of free attendance to an accompanying spouse or other guest.
Yeah, okay, so that makes sense. So if we're having an event where most people are going to be bringing a spouse or other guest, it is okay for, in some circumstances, an agency designee to determine that the attendance of an employee's guest is appropriate. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's consistent with the overall purpose of the widely attended gathering exception.
Right.
And again, we provide agencies the discretion to make this determination for themselves. Okay, very good. So that concludes our brief discussion of the widely attended gathering exception. We hope you enjoyed this. If you're interested in learning more, we mentioned before we have the massive open online course that we offered in August. You can take that as an on-demand learning course. You can look at part 1, take a listen, get some more detail about the exception. Another thing you could do is then move forward and try the exercises yourself. And this would be a good thing for everyone to do. You can find the exercises from that class and have a crack at it, have a go.
Yeah.
And then during the debrief, you can listen to that presentation and see how you did.
Yeah.
See if you were comfortable with the process, if you followed all of the steps, and if you considered all the relevant factors when making your agency interest determination. So we would like to invite you to join us in just over an hour for part 4 of our Understanding Gift Exception presentation. So this will be the conclusion of our new ethics official track of the virtual-only summit experience.
That's right. We're going to cover the rest of the exceptions this afternoon. Some of them that it's good to know about, but unless you're in specific circumstances, probably won't apply very often to you. But it's still good to know they're there. And
so we're gonna figure this out for completeness. We want to be able to take these 4 presentations and hand them to someone and say, look, this is the guide to the reg.
Right.
So yeah, please do, because there are some cases where you find yourself in a circumstance where a special circumstance applies, and it's good to know about them. And also going over the exclusions, I think, will be very helpful for folks who are brand new.
Right. And so with that, thank you very much for joining us this morning, and we look forward to seeing you this afternoon. I'm Ryan Segrist.
And I'm Patrick Shepard.